Okay, let's call this meeting to order. It is February 25th. We're in the Olentangy administrative offices. Ms. Hatfield, can you please call the roll?
Mr. King.
Here.
Mrs. Patrick.
Here.
Mr. O'Brien.
Here.
Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel.
Here.
And Dr. Weiss.
Here. Please stand and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everybody. First order of business, I need approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Patrick.
Yes.
Dr. Weiss.
Yes.
Mr. King.
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien.
Yes.
And Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel.
Yes.
Thank you.
We don't have any presentations for tonight, so I will go into my board president's report. For the last two Wednesday evenings, Dr. Wise and I have attended a virtual program hosted by the League of Women Voters in Northern Ohio called Equity and Racism in Ohio Schools. We stumbled upon it because we were Googling for a project that we were working on together. And so I was very glad that we stumbled upon this program because it has been very beneficial. The first session had members of the Ohio State School Board talk about how their anti-racism policy came about, how it was crafted, and what they hope to do now that this state school board has approved it. Last night's program had the state superintendent, Paulo Di Maria, and 4 other local school superintendents from across the state, and they spoke about the programming that they are doing in their own districts. One topic that they discussed was that of recruiting diverse candidates into the field of education, and all of the superintendents that were on the call, from Hilliard to Akron to the University Heights, Cleveland Heights district to Bedford City, they all said it is very difficult to recruit diverse candidates because they don't feel that Ohio's colleges and universities are producing enough for all of the school districts in the state of Ohio. I know that we have undertaken a great project with Otterbein, and it's hopefully going to be expanded. I won't say to what other college, but Otterbein is providing scholarships to students of diverse backgrounds who go through our teacher academy and then go on to Otterbein to go into teaching. And that's a unique program to Olentangy, and it looks like it might be expanded here in the future. So I was very happy to hear about that. We are being proactive. Lakeisha and I are also working on a project together in the area of equity and inclusion that we hope to bring to the full board at one of the March board meetings. Last Saturday, I participated in the Redistricting Forums, we did it virtually, which is a new way of doing it. I found them very informative, and I just want to remind everyone the process. The school board, this board, approves the redistricting guidelines. And then it's up to the superintendent to redraw the attendance lines because that's what the Ohio Revised Code says. That's what he does. Going with what was presented at the meetings, Mr. Rafe has taken a redistricting committee. They have looked at all of the data. They've come up with proposed maps. They presented those maps. They're online, and they presented them in a Q&A forum with 3 forums on Saturday, and now that committee is collecting the data. The maps are not done deals. They're just put out to collect community input. That survey is online through February 28th, and when the committee gets all of the information, they will look at the information, make any adjustments to the plans, and present the recommendation to the superintendent. It's then up to the superintendent to announce what his plan is going to be for the next school year. Now, in the survey that's posted online, the committee said several times during the forums, please provide input, please provide input. Well, the input that they're looking for is not, don't move my student. It's more constructive input, like, have you thought about what the numbers would look like if you moved neighborhood X to school Y? And so give them some kind of constructive input that they can try when they're looking at the attendance boundaries, because that is very helpful. So Mr. Rafe will announce his final decision on March 25th. Also, this coming Saturday, I was asked to sit in on the virtual model UN. And last year, Mindy Patrick and I went to it in person, and it was so interesting. We spent several hours with those students because they actually look at issues in the areas of human rights, climate change, public health, and they propose plans that will provide solutions, and then the whole body, votes to accept their plan and move forward. It is just like the workings of the United Nations, and it was so interesting because students from all over our school district are in the Model UN, and it was just fascinating. So I'm going to tune in on Saturday to see how it's done virtually. Today I spoke with Representative Rick Carfagna regarding school funding and House Bill 1, which is the Fair School Funding Plan. Last General Assembly, it was House Bill 305, the Patterson bill. It's basically the same bill. Representative Carfagna believes it has very strong support in the House because it was passed unanimously in the House in December. And so we are looking at doing a virtual school funding community forum on March 22nd. That's a Monday. And Representative Carfagna has agreed to participate. I spoke with Senator Brenner earlier this year, and he said he would if it can fit into his schedule. So tomorrow I'm calling him, and I will also call Representative Jordan, and we'll do a school funding virtual meeting. We've done these before. Usually we've done it in this room, but because of COVID, we can't meet in this room. So we'll get more information out to everybody on that, because as Mr. Rafe says, this is one issue that we can all get behind, and that is to fix the school funding formula. Finally, as we move to having our hybrid students into the buildings 5 full days, I want to remind people that our policy 8450.01 is still in effect. That is our masking policy. That policy was passed by this board on August the 13th, and it's regarding the use of face and mask coverings. And it states in their cloth, there has been some discussion, if the teachers are getting their second dose, if the masks go away. The governor has addressed that again today. Our policy still stands. We have not voted to do away with that policy. But even though a majority of our staff members will have had their second shot by March 15th, this policy is still in place. And if you need to review the policy, you can go to our microsite, olentangyschools.org, and then click on the safety protocols. That is all that I have. Mr. Rafe?
That was a very thorough, energetic, thorough report, Mrs. Fiesel. I have, actually, I'm going to be up here for a little bit because we've got a lot to talk about, so I'll give you that heads up right from the start. I can't not put a couple Living the Mission slides on these presentations. So obviously February is Black History Month, so all across the district we've been learning about and participating in activities related to Black history. Our one community conference event for this month was an African American read in and book talk, and we got a lot of really positive feedback on that. So again, I'm proud of the efforts of the staff with all they do in regards to Black History Month. We had a Berkshire Middle School student, Gabriella T-Berry, was awarded first place for her artwork in the Dr. Martin Luther King Art, Writing, and Multimedia Contest, which was held by the Ohio Civil Rights Commission. So you see a picture of Gabriella T-Berry. It's actually the daughter of our former Congressman, Pat T-Berry. So very honored to show her. Her drawing depicted the galaxy with Alzheimer's Association logo and cancer awareness ribbon to share the challenges of her loved ones. So congratulations to Gabriella. As you know, March 6th is our next COVID-19 clinic. We are administering the second dose. We're working closely with the health district, and I really have to give a lot of credit to our staff. Everybody on the leadership team has stepped up and helped. Krista and Todd especially doing a lot of work with the vaccine clinic, and Jeff Gordon and his team, and we've really mobilized the forces to get this done for our county, because obviously the more people we have vaccinated, the better off we'll be, and keep moving closer and closer to that desired herd immunity. Mrs. Fiesel did just share quite a bit about our redistricting update. I have gotten quite a few emails personally. I know some of you have got, a lot of you have gotten personal emails. The surveys are open through February 28th, so the community can share their feedback. And I do appreciate what you said, Mrs. Fiesel, about having constructive suggestions. Usually the suggestions are don't move my child, move somebody else's child, because everybody has a great suggestion for who else to move. But again, this is something that we have to do here in Olentangy. It's not something that we want to do, but we'll get to the backside of this and have a great plan going forward. The committee makes recommendations, and I've been emailing a lot of people back. Committee makes recommendations. I'm going to make a decision, and what my history has shown with this is I'm going to make some kind of combination of the multiple recommendations, as I've kind of always put that together once I sift through all the feedback with our leadership team. So we'll have a good decision here by March 25th board meeting. You guys get to find out first, then we'll release it to the community on the 26th. Testing update. So it appears state tests are going forward. As much as I do not, right now we are currently testing our elementary students in the Terra Nova. As much as I would really like to not have to give state tests this year, because we'll be just getting back into full-time, the swing of things full-time, and the testing schedule is just very disruptive. I do think there's some interest in really seeing what our data would look like with these tests. But there are a lot of challenges with the testing as we go to try to, there's a lot of logistical challenges that we're working through. Jack, do you want to jump in and say anything more about some of the feds and the...
Sure. So the federal government has just this week told the states that they value testing and they want testing to continue, but they also value safety, and they want states to provide flexibility. They want states to reduce or eliminate any potential penalties that might exist in a state report card. So basically they want us to give the test, we can find out how the kids are doing, but they don't want us, they want it to be useful information, not evaluative information. So we need to wait and see how Ohio is going to respond to the opportunity from the federal government to create more flexibility in testing. And then beyond that, we have to figure out how to test our CDL students, because the test can only be given in school, and how to do that safely with all of our other COVID safety precautions in place. So we are working through all of that, and we will find a solution, but Mark is correct that it is complicated.
Yes.
What's the time frame of when Ohio is anticipated to make their decisions?
They have two bills, one in the House and one in the Senate right now, and they were moving. And once that ruling came out Monday night, they didn't have a hearing this week. So
Explain like with Cleveland, it's not in remote.
So there was an element of what the federal government said, the U.S. Department of Education, that they do not want districts to bring kids in only to test. So if districts are like a Cleveland who is totally remote, and I don't know what Cleveland's planning to do, but they're not expecting that a district restart in-person attendance only for testing, only to then send them back to virtual learning. So our area of interest is, what does that mean? How does that apply to the CDL students, who many of whom have declared that they don't feel safe in school, and that's why we created the option. That's why they are virtual this year. So how should we be communicating to those families about their need to test? And testing at the state level will all happen after spring break.
Thank you.
Well, there's another example of nothing's easy. You know, there's just nothing easy about it. So more information coming on that. So I want to make sure I give an update, as I said last meeting, every few weeks on our attendance model. You know, again, I'm going to keep hitting this point. When we announced the attendance model in July, we said that there were going to be two learning models, one in-person learning model and then one committed distance learning model. You know, that again has not changed. I want to reemphasize that our attendance models are not directly tied to the color-coded map that was so prevalent in our thought process back in July and August. I keep hearing that the entire state may be going orange here in the next few weeks if the cases continue to trend down, and hopefully yellow very, very soon. As you know, committed distance learning students that chose to remain in the program will complete the school year in CDL, and all of our other students will be moving to in-person daily attendance on March 15th. So the next couple slides are going to address a lot of questions I got after the previous board meeting when I announced that we were going to be coming back full time. So again, there are obviously questions and concerns about safety. Social distancing is probably the most frequent question we get. And again, according to the Delaware Public Health District and the guidelines that we're following here is that 3 feet of social distancing whenever possible. And the key phrase we're going to continue to use is layered mitigation. So the layered mitigation includes hand washing, mask wearing, sneeze guards, shields, regular disinfecting and sanitizing, and 3 feet of social distancing whenever possible. So, you know, again, as I've said repeatedly, the proper mask wearing has been the key. We met with the high school and middle school principals this week to continue to talk about how we were going to maintain social distancing in classrooms and hallways and the cafeteria, common areas, whether or not we were going to continue to use one-way traffic patterns and desktop shields and all those kind of things. So you see there, these are questions that were directly posed regarding high school class changes. You know, they're only 5 minutes long, so the thought that kids are at risk of contracting COVID in a 5-minute period while everyone's masked is simply, that's not where a kid's going to contract COVID. So, you know, we are going to have individual students' desk positions between 3 and 6 feet whenever possible. There was a question about middle school class changes, and they're already staggered. You know, we talked about lockers in the schools, and high school kids, a lot of high school kids don't even use lockers. Some of our buildings, the middle schools specifically, are going to choose to not have their kids use the lockers because that'll help with hallway traffic and the expedience of getting through hallways. One of the buildings is going to have their kids use their lockers just because it's a bigger building with bigger class sizes, and they don't want coats and book bags and things like that in already classes that are already fairly large. So we're leaving some of these decisions up to the buildings to, you know, obviously they have different physical layouts, different physical spaces, so we will have some different protocols, but everything we do in the buildings will be approved by the health district and approved by us as being satisfactory for the safe operation of our schools. Lunch is obviously the one area of concern. We are looking at expanding areas where kids will eat. They may be eating in the commons and or the auxiliary gyms, again, depending on the layouts of all of our different schools, but we are looking at expanding as much as possible to maximize as much physical distancing as we can while the kids are eating. Everybody will be a minimum of 3 feet apart, separated by clear dividers when eating in the lunchrooms. We're going to seat kids in pods so that they're typically with, you know, similar groups and all those kind of things. So, you know, this is the one area where there is a risk of exposure. We're going to encourage kids to obviously, because it's difficult to wear the mask all the time, but in a 30-minute lunch period, by the time the kids get down at the high school level, by the time they get down to the commons, by the time they get their food and get seated, by the time they, it starts to cut into it, and they don't really eat for a solid 20 to 25 minutes. So eating with taking your mask off, obviously, to eat, putting your mask on when you're not eating, I think, again, we're going to minimize a lot of the risk there. And again, this is a thing I've had a lot of conversation with other superintendents of large school districts that, again, we're all following this same path in order to have our kids in full time. But, again, a large district like Lakota or Mason have not seen problems with their lunches in terms of spread. So, we've gotten questions about face masks and whether or not, people are properly following them. I was at Orange High School today, and I did not see one face mask violation the whole time I was there. I did a lap around the school. I was in a couple different places for a couple different meetings. I did not see one. Actually, there was only one face mask violation because I started talking to somebody and my mask came down below my nose. And I didn't, which of course, I didn't see one. Now, I've had questions from parents about, again, we know that the face masks have proven to be effective in terms of, probably our most effective mitigation. The expectation is that they will continue to be worn by all of our staff and all of our students, regardless of whether or not the staff is vaccinated. And if a child is coming home and consistently telling their parent that there are face mask violations, we encourage parents, we encourage kids to talk to the school administration and or make a report through our Stay Safe, Speak Up hotline. But again, we'll address it. We've talked to the administrators about being extra vigilant on this. But this is a key factor in us coming back full time and staying back full time. We get a question about community spread. The concern is that the teachers are vaccinated, that's great, but kids aren't and parents aren't. So kids are going to come to school, get exposed, and then bring that exposure back home to their families. The reality is, according to the CDC, based on all the available data, in-person learning in schools has not been associated with substantial community transmission. They're just not simply finding that because the kids are properly wearing their masks in school, they're not obtaining the virus in school, and they're in turn not bringing it home to their families. Most of the cases we've had have been families, parents who have given it to their kids. So we do not believe that this being in school full-time will contribute to greater community spread. The CDC also states that there's evidence suggests that staff-to-staff transmission is more common than transmission from students to staff. And we have had that because our staff early on maybe weren't following some protocols while they were alone in the buildings and things like that. So that has happened, or they went out to lunch together or those kind of things, thinking they were safe, and one person ended up positive, so we ended up having 2 or 3 more positives. So, again, the reason we waited to come back full-time after the vaccination is because, we want to make sure that staff transmission is of a greater concern than transmission to students. So, as I've said all along, I want to make sure we can have our teachers in front of our kids, and that's getting the vaccine is certainly going to greatly improve that likelihood. So, looking ahead, the week of March 15th is going to be a lot like the normal first week of school. We're going to have to establish a lot of new routines. Transportation, pickup and drop off will be a little bit late like it normally does the first week of school. The teachers are going to have to work to establish a new classroom community, school day schedule. It's going to take a lot of effort and patience, and it's why I wanted to get back in before we went on spring break so we can figure some things out over those 2 weeks, and then use spring break to make any tweaks, and then obviously hit the ground running for fourth quarter. I've had questions about spring athletics. As I said all along, my worry about the being full in too early was that there was a likelihood we could have to go back to remote learning. With this, the worst we'd have to do would be going back to hybrid. So I really believe spring athletics will be able to take regardless of what attendance model we're in throughout the rest of the year. So, post spring break, my hope would be that we continue to have positive trends and that we can look at more and more opportunities to return to more normalcy. Mr. Wright told me before the start of the meeting, tomorrow will be the first day all year that we're not sending a brand new COVID letter.
No positive cases.
No positive cases reported today.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. So with that, again, as I said 2 weeks ago, the pandemic isn't over though, and we have to talk about what we're going to do here for the spring. Obviously, graduation is a key thing we're looking at, and I want to spend time here talking to you and letting as Mrs. Fiesel likes to always say, because the public is watching, that was a public meeting, everybody has the opportunity to hear this, and we'll put this in our board recap email tomorrow. Graduation's 12 weeks away, and we've already been talking about what we're going to do for a few weeks. I think it's important to note that regardless of what other districts do with regards to graduation, we have to look at what works best for us here in Olentangy. And once again, the fact that we have 4 schools, 2 of which are a couple of the largest schools in the state with over 500 graduates, it impacts how we decide to do graduation. And regardless of what we decide, with regards to graduation, we will all do the same thing, whether it's an in-person all-together ceremony or we'll show you the options we have coming up, but we will all be doing the same thing with regard to graduation. Obviously, the Schottenstein Center is our best option. We have May 23rd reserved for the Schottenstein Center. As of the 19th of February, Ohio State has still not made a decision if they will allow us or if they will be hosting any events. But again, if things continue to trend positively, and as we all know, the governor made a few statements today that things may be changing with regards to events. I'm not real big fan of how he drops these little crumbs to the public and then lets the public overreact to them, because all that does is create a lot of questions for us. But until the orders are signed and the guidelines are given, we can't make any decisions. But keeping the Schottenstein Center in play for May 23rd is, again, our hope is that if they go to a larger capacity for the Schottenstein Center, 30% would allow us to have virtually a typical graduation at the Schottenstein Center. So that's our hope. We did examine possibly going to Huntington Park. A few districts are doing that. Some of them are, smaller districts. The seating capacity of Huntington Park is 10,000. So at the previous order of 15% capacity, that'd be 1,500 tickets. We do have a date reserved of May. We have a hold on a date. We've got to let them know tomorrow, actually, whether or not we're going to use it. The capacity currently is about 1,500, and that does include all the graduates. So if you look at a place like an Orange High School with 550 graduates, leaving you 1,000 tickets for everybody else, that means a child is going to have to choose between mom or dad to come to graduation. Probably not going to fly real well here. There's a lot of unknowns with the Huntington Park. The cost is $20,000 for staging, scoreboard, and staffing, but it doesn't include a lot of other factors, and it doesn't include parking. So Huntington Park is, I believe, cost prohibitive, but it's an outdoor graduation that we're banking on a date being, they've given us rain dates of June 1st or June 3rd, but I am really leery of an outdoor graduation in one location having to go through 4 of them in the same day. So in all likelihood, we're going to pass on Huntington Park, but the communications team did spend a lot of time. You see there the capacities at the current, we prepared this report ahead of time. At the current 15%, you get 1.7 guests at Orange High School, 3.5 guests at Berlin, 3.7 at Olentangy, and 1.9 at Liberty. So obviously that could go up, but even, giving families 2 tickets per graduate isn't going to go well at our bigger schools.
Well, I don't know, maybe my son would be thankful he wouldn't get to go, but.
We did investigate Nationwide Arena. Right now, that's not an option for any high school graduations. Now, Mr. O'Brien, maybe you can pull some strings for us. The problem with Nationwide is that's the window of the playoffs. So they're just not opening it up for high school graduations. We have started examining our high school stadiums. A lot of smaller districts, Buckeye Valley, Big Walnut, and Delaware, the tradition is they graduate from their stadiums. Again, we haven't done that, largely because of the size of our classes, largely because of the fear of rain and all those things. Again, capacity is a problem. At the current 15%, we get 580 seats on the home side, 230 seats on the visitor side, which is a total of 810 seats. Now, whereas Huntington Park was counting the graduates in their count, we don't have, just like an athletic event, we don't have to count them. So that would be the total, 810 seats, which again, you see there on the home side, or if we use both home and visitor, we still don't get 2 people for Liberty and Orange. There's also additional track seating would have to be acquired. There's costs, there's just, again, a lot of other costs that are associated with it. But the problem, again, with the high school stadiums, the upside is we do everybody together, the class is all together. The downside is that if it rains, we're looking at multiple graduation dates and rain dates required. So that's a risk. And the high school principals are talking with the student body, so to see what their preference might be. But if we get forced into this as an option, we're going to continue to discuss it. Again, it's one of those things of there's a huge risk in terms of trying to pull this off for 4 different dates. I don't know about you guys. I've only lived in Central Ohio for 22 years. It rains a little bit in May. So the other option we're talking about again is the drive-through that we did, kind of like what we did last year. We would do an online ceremony, do the graduation walk, 4 schools, 4 dates. We'd still have the radio. The virtual graduation ceremony would be pre-recorded this year because we would have know ahead of time if we make this decision. The upside of this is that we know we can pull this off rain or shine, because we can tent the area where the graduates would get out, get in under a tent, do their walk. The parents are in their car. Everybody, we know we can pull this one off rain or shine. The downside of it is that the graduates aren't all together. We got a lot of positive feedback on it last year. I think, and Mr. Wright experienced it as a parent, and the phrase he used in describing it is last year's ceremony became about the kid and the family, as opposed to the Schottenstein Center ceremony, which is about the class. So, again, we're going to talk to the kids at the high schools about that as we go forward making a decision. I did hear today that the governor said there's no reason prom can't happen.
Wait, what?
What?
Are you serious?
Did he say that?
We can have graduation, but we can have prom.
But I printed off his statement.
Well, the health orders still haven't been changed. So dancing is allowed. So I don't. We're not sure if we're going to call it prom. We do have 4 dates reserved. The high school principals are actively talking with all of their student bodies, their class leaders about and kicking around some other ideas. We talked about whether it should be a senior-only event because of they got a limit of 300 people, and these kids who were juniors lost prom, and now they're seniors. We got to figure out something for them. So that's being talked about. We've talked about maybe a senior dinner even at one of these locations, because you can get 300 kids, or 300 to 500 kids. Well, 300 kids right now is the current limit. We'll see if the governor changes that. a comedian, a band, or, but they're table seated and all those kind of things. So, we are actively discussing. Now, prom every year is different at every school.
Yeah.
So this isn't one of those things where, it could end up being a little different at one school or the other. Things that Olentangy and Berlin may be able to do because they have fewer students, maybe have to look different, a little bit differently at Orange or Liberty. But, this is one of those ones where while graduation's a district event, prom is a school event. So, we don't pick their DJs, but we decide when the graduation is going to be as a board. So, with regard to other things like the other annual year-end activities, there are a lot of senior events, traditional senior events that the principals are actively trying to organize. We want to honor as we go back full time, even though I got some messages from some seniors who weren't overly joyed about having to go back to school full time because they like their schedule and they like working and all those things. We are actively working to try to honor the class of 2021 in the most appropriate way possible. So things like senior breakfast, the senior picnic, that would be an outdoor event, senior clap out, all those kind of things. So we're going to try to do as much as we possibly can to make the fourth quarter memorable for our seniors. Same thing with our middle school events and the traditional eighth grade clap out, eighth grade awards. Again, as long as the specific guidelines are in place, we're going to follow the guidelines. So some things may have to be virtual like they were last year. Other things, again, if we can get something planned and plan it with appropriate safety protocols, we're certainly going to do that. And the same thing, obviously, for elementary events, fifth grade clap out, field day, and all those kind of things that, again, if we're able to do them safely, following the guidelines, whatever guidelines and protocols get dropped on us at any given date, we'll pull that off. And lastly, there are the senior awards. We are going to do a virtual presentation and streaming for the senior awards and scholarship night, just like we did last year. The capacity of Bridgewater simply can't accommodate the number of senior awards and scholarship recipients that we have. So it just takes a lot of time to put these, again, everything takes an incredible amount of time and planning and logistical considerations to put all this stuff together, and it just doesn't happen. I think there's a perception with some people that this stuff just happens overnight. We just throw on a light switch and have graduation or have a prom or have a, everything takes a lot of planning. So any questions on any of the end of year stuff? Yes, Dr. Wise.
So with the opening of the being able to have like banquets and things like that, what about like the winter sports here ending? Is there a possibility they can do banquets?
As of right now, like
we're still talking about that. The difficulty is there's so many things like we're about bringing people into the buildings. Like right now, we're still not gonna loosen up and bring volunteers in the buildings and try to continue to limit as much exposure as possible, because we've used the phrase all along, we've got to go slow to go fast. The more we loosen on other things in other areas, the greater likelihood we could have a rise in cases. But we're discussing that, because right now it's like, winter sports are ending now, so we'd have to make it this. I don't know that if they were able to do them, they'd have to. I wouldn't say I would feel comfortable doing that before we're in school full time, March 15th, and by then, I don't know when winter sports ends.
Basketball's still another week or so after that.
Yeah.
Well, like Olentangy girls basketball.
As of now, the guidelines for those kind of activities haven't changed.
Yeah. So the girls basketball teams are, I think they're all done. Are you done? Are you still? Done. Yeah. Olentangy's done. I think Berlin is done. I'm not. I think Liberty.
Yeah, they're all done.
So
girls are all done.
Yeah.
Boys tournaments just started. I know. Winter sport parent.
Spring sports parent now.
Yeah. No others? Good. All right, and then just some action items to note that we have approving the YMCA lease for our Y Club in all our elementary buildings. We have 2 new maintenance vehicles per our schedule, replacement for maintenance vehicles. We're replacing roofs at Liberty High and Wyandotte Run. And we are buying technology for Shale Meadows Elementary School. So those are 4 action items. And then, as I said, our vaccine clinic on March 6th and our next board meeting March 11th.
You failed to mention the big event that happened this morning.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Mr. Rafe was on WCOL 92.3, and they were so appreciative that he would come on and speak to them about the school opening because there were other superintendents in Central Ohio that declined. And so he was able to put out, to make the listeners aware of our back to school procedures and when we're starting. And they asked him about students that are falling behind, and he used his phrase that he likes to use, falling behind who? Because every student in the nation has had some kind of upheaval due to this pandemic. And they're like, oh yeah, it was like a light bulb moment for them. So it's a very good interview. He made Olentangy very proud.
Well, thank you. It was fun. They, I said I didn't know I had a choice to say no. Christy just told me I was going on the radio. So yeah, that's good. It was fun.
Any other questions for the superintendent?
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the treasurer's report, please.
Good evening. See if I can just lower my mask today. Between my mask and my glasses, I'm constantly fighting something. So we'll begin the treasurer's report with a few updates for you. We will begin our eFinance Plus conversion March 2nd. So we start that with a kickoff meeting with Meta, who is our ITC center. They are our technical support center, and they house our financial fiscal software. So we're excited to finally get to a point where we are moving forward and planning that implementation process and getting some traction under us for that. So pretty excited. At this point, it's just going to be primarily for the treasurer's staff to really answer some questions, think about where we are currently, and setting forth a timeline for the rest of the implementation. So we'll have more updates as we go forward with that. In terms of action items this evening, we have quite a bit on the board agenda for you. We have our January financials, amended appropriations, board meeting minutes for both January 14th and the 27th, and then our donations. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take just a moment and walk through a little bit more information on those donations. We have just over $1,400 coming from Staples of Lewis Center in the way of supplies that is donated to Glen Oak Elementary. Our Olentangy Music Boosters Association made a donation of just under $600 to Olentangy High School. William Browning made a donation to Olentangy Liberty High School of $600 for the students in the work study program. Olentangy Liberty Athletic Boosters made a donation to Olentangy schools for just over $1,400 for a high school supplemental coach position. Olentangy Orange Athletic Boosters made a donation with just over $1,200 for supplemental coach positions. And then Miss Kelly Wolf donated to Olentangy High School a washer and dryer to be used by the custodial department at just over $1,100. So per board policy, we always like to bring forward donations we've received that are over that are $500 or more, and we do recognize that our community provides more in-kind donations and their volunteer time, even though they're not in our buildings with us at this current time. To go back to our January financials, we have started receiving tax distributions from the Delaware County Auditor for the first half collections of the 2020 tax year payments. We are also getting casino tax revenue coming in and posting to the January financials. That was slightly higher than anticipated. We know that the casinos were closed during the beginning of the pandemic, and we weren't exactly sure how fast they would recover after opening. But they are recovering a little bit quicker, so we'll have a positive variance in that category for us. Personal services reflects a decrease in costs on some of our substitute intervention aids and we also have some decreases in, of course, athletic and educational trips, helping purchase services. And then again, with alternative student transportation, that's not as big of a cost as some of those services have declined because of kids being in alternative programming. To give an update on our CARES Act funding, this continues to be a conversation that we have with community members. We are getting questions about where we are spending it, how much we've received, and where have those funds gone. So for the community, if you're looking at the financial statements, you're going to notice that it's labeled under Fund 510. That's how we have to designate that fund on the financial statements per the Auditor of State and their guidelines. So the district has received $247,000 from the first round of ESSER funds, which have all been paid with the exception of like $5,000. And all of our $1.3 million federal funds for the Coronavirus Relief Act have been spent as well. We have spent those items on PPE, so our face masks, our sneeze guards, our stickers on the floor, the additional tables and such, all of those things that we need in place to help with our mitigation strategies that were purchased when we entered school as a hybrid attendance model are in place, and that's where the funds have gone. Are there any questions about the board financials that I can answer for you?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
While Mrs. Hatfield goes to her seat and Mrs. Davis moves up to the podium, I would just like to remind people we're moving into the public participation session of our meeting. Public participation is a full 30 minutes. The people who have submitted information to be read during public participation have done so through email. They have to state their name and address, and each submission has a limit of 5 minutes. And as we have been doing the past couple meetings, all public participation will be posted on the website following the meeting. Don't expect it tonight. Somebody has to actually scan it in and then we post it, but it will be up there. Okay, Mrs. Davis, are we ready to begin?
We are ready.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Russell Wangler, 7207 Redwood Valley Court, Lewis Center, Ohio. All of our children, especially our elementary age children, need to have a full-time option. Teachers have been and are being vaccinated despite their risk being low. Contact tracing studies demonstrate globally that community transmission rate from school-aged to adults is low. Teachers are essential workers. The in-person classroom experience is critical for social and intellectual development K-12. State test results demonstrate remote schooling is not effective for all. Give our kids a full-time in-classroom option. Dennis Bell, 8122 Trail Lake Drive, Powell, Ohio. I'd like to thank the superintendent, staff, and school board for their prudence, forbearance, and persistence in the face of continued adversity and daily criticism. Even though you're normally responsible for decisions that have impacts on lives throughout the district, those in the past 12-month period have been on a drastically elevated level. I am one of many who appreciates the care and consideration you've taken in the attempt to get this right. I'd venture to say most everyone, including you, wants everything to return to normal, but I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you all for exercising judgment and restraint throughout this period. I'm proud to be an Olentangy parent and will be forever grateful. Robin Winslow, 2300 Reeves Avenue, Lewis Center, Ohio. How could you possibly keep students apart in our highly populated middle school and high schools going 5 days a week? It would be negligent to rush back to 5 days a week. How would transportation be handled? I worry about our teachers, staff, and students. We enforce CDC guidelines at a board meeting, in restaurants, etc., but exempt schools. That is not logical. You have to look at the big picture. We're surviving a pandemic. Our children are resilient. We need to be too, and patient. The pressures of a pandemic are being blamed on OLSD and school districts around the country. It's unfair and ignorant. You are doing a great job. Don't be bullied into making a dangerous decision that is not logical. Packing schools back to full capacity when it's not safe is not okay. Children are resilient. Grown-ups need to be too. Salon Wise, 4842 Normandy Drive, Galena, Ohio. Hello, board members. After last summer's events, it's great to see Olentangy taking steps in the right direction regarding race. Admittedly, we have a long way to go and much work to do ensuring an equitable experience for all students. But to Olentangy's credit, adding staff to the district equity and inclusion team, expanding the One Community Conference, as well as working toward long and short-term goals in the area of race and equality are all positive steps in this long journey. However, when it comes to the district rebranding plan, I'm afraid the board has a tremendous blind spot. The Olentangy High School Braves nickname is widely viewed as dehumanizing and equating Native American males to something less than a man. It is comparable to calling an African American man boy. How can we claim to have zero tolerance for racism in our buildings when the school walls, athletic jerseys, basketball court, and football field are all covered with a racial slur? How can we endeavor to be one community when we completely disregard the offense that name causes a small but present portion of our community? How can we continue to associate that word with one of our schools when the National Congress of American Indians, American Psychological Association, National Education Association, the NAACP, and others all condemn its use? The fact is, we cannot claim our school buildings to be a racism-free zone while the school itself maintains a racist slur as its nickname. I'm aware there is a vocal segment of our community who would prefer to continue using that name in the interest of tradition. Tradition is an important part of life, but not when it dehumanizes and demeans. Holding on to such traditions will appease many, but simultaneously insult, offend, and devalue students and families throughout the country and in our own community. This is not a time for upholding tradition. It's a time for doing what's right and frankly inevitable, whether or not it is politically popular. This decision rests solely in your hands. Thank you for your consideration and courage as you lead us away from outdated and offensive traditions in favor of a more respectful, inclusive, and equitable Olentangy experience for all students, staff, and community members. Thank you, Salon Wise of the Parent Diversity Network. Ashley Wise, 4842 Normandy Drive, Galena. Hello, school board members. I applaud the district's rebranding effort that is already underway. As an active community member, I realize the time and energy that goes into such a task. However, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many other allies throughout our community, changing only the offensive imagery associated with Olentangy High School while maintaining the mascot name does not remedy the problem. It is actually painting over an issue, not progress. Choosing to keep the name Braves while overlooking the objections of people from a minority community is actually an example of privilege. While our voices as parents and community members matter, we realize what matters the most regarding this issue are the facts and the opinions of the Native American community, and today I choose to speak up as an ally. The use of this mascot and the associated name was adopted at a time when this type of racism was unfortunately acceptable, but once you know better, you do better. Olentangy, this is your chance to do better as we strive to be one community. I strongly encourage you to reopen this discussion and allow the committees charged with the task of rebranding to be able to truly do so while being respectful to our Indigenous brothers and sisters and fiscally responsible. Respectful by acknowledging the offense it causes, and fiscally responsible by avoiding having to revisit this issue in the future. Native Circle is the longest active Native American education website. They explain the term Braves dehumanizes and equates the Native American male to something less than a man. Comparative example, calling an African American man boy, period. The use of such mascot names has been condemned by many nationally recognized groups such as the National Congress of American Indians, American Psychological Association, National Education Association, the NAACP, and more. The National Congress of American Indians called upon the Secretary of the Department of Education to immediately eliminate race-based Native logos, mascots, and names from state educational institutions across the United States. If NFL and MLB teams are finally looking at this issue, why not Olentangy High School? Thank you for listening and reopening this discussion so that we are not perpetuating these offenses to the next generation of Olentangy students. As a community, let's do better. Thank you. Ashley Wise, member of the Parent Diversity Network. Pam Lewis, and no address was provided. Hello, I'm writing in regards to the rebranding effort for Liberty, specifically the name Braves. I applaud your willingness to remove the offensive imagery and ask that you continue to make the bold moves of eliminating offensive language and imagery. The National Council of American Indians and many Native Americans have made statements specific to the use of the word Braves, asserting the use of the word perpetuates the warrior savage myth often associated with Native people. I implore you to rethink your position. As I always say, it's about learned and shared values and constantly changing behavior, parentheses, practices, norms, etc., of a group of interactive people. Our community is interactive and is changing for the good. The warrior savage myth reinforces the racist views that Indians are uncivilized and uneducated. Thank you again for rethinking and changing the negative narratives. Let us mitigate the use of this word to heal the deeply painful misidentification Native Americans have endured and instead send a message of progressive, positive change in our Olentangy community. I believe this mascot and the associated name was adopted at a time when this type of racism was acceptable, but we are in a more enlightened time. I urge you to embrace a full rebranding, one that sheds painful images and language of the past. Thank you. Christina Solmos, 3177 Farmers Delight Drive, Lewis Center, Ohio. Hello, board members. I applaud the district rebranding effort that is already underway. However, in my opinion and the opinion of many other allies throughout our community, changing the offensive Native American imagery associated with Olentangy High School while maintaining the mascot name does not remedy the problem. While our voices as parents and community members matter, we realize what matters the most regarding this issue are the facts and the opinions of the Native American community. Native Circle is the longest active Native American education website. They explain the term Braves dehumanizes and equates the Native American male to something less than a man. Comparative example, calling an African American man boy. The use of such mascot names has been condemned by the National Congress of American Indians, American Psychological Association, National Education Association, the NAACP, and more. The National Congress of American Indians called upon the Secretary of the Department of Education to immediately eliminate race-based Native logos, mascots, and names from state educational institutions across the United States. There is no question, we as a district have no choice but to eliminate any variation of the name Braves. Choosing otherwise would be a tremendous slap in the face to the Native American community, the advice of the American Psychological Association, and recommendation of the NEA. I encourage you to reopen the discussion in this matter and come to the only conclusion worthy of a district truly endeavoring to create one community. Thank you, Christina. Sarah Narayana, 7746 Lydia Drive, Lewis Center, Ohio. Dear Olentangy School Board members, I'm writing in regard to the rebranding of school mascots and specifically keeping the name Braves. I want to applaud your willingness to remove the offensive imagery and ask that you continue to make the bold move of removing equally offensive language. Many Native American people, including the National Council of American Indians, have made statements specifically about the use of the word Braves, asserting the use of the word perpetuates the warrior savage myth often associated with Native people. This may come as a surprise to people not part of a marginalized group, and I implore you to rethink your position. The warrior savage myth reinforces the racist views that Indians are uncivilized and uneducated, and it has been used to justify policies of forced assimilation and the deconstruction of Indian culture. The use of this word can be deeply painful for people who identify as Native American and sends a bigger message to the community that Olentangy is insensitive at best. I believe this mascot and the associated name was adopted at a time when this type of racism was acceptable, but we are in a more enlightened time now, and I urge you to embrace a full rebranding, one that sheds painful images and language of the past. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Romy Wilson, 8146 Wildflower Drive, Powell, Ohio. Would like to talk about a fundraising night at Chipotle for my club, Teen Institute, and other event ideas. We did follow up and explain how to handle this. Rebecca Roebuck, 3108 Shoreline Drive. Dear Olentangy School Board members, I'm writing in regard to the rebranding of school mascots and specifically keeping the name Braves. I want to applaud your willingness to remove the offensive imagery and ask that you continue to make the bold move of removing equally offensive language. Many Native American people, including the National Council of American Indians, have made statements specifically about the use of the word Braves, asserting the use of the word perpetuates the warrior savage myth often associated with Native people. This may come as a surprise to people not part of a marginalized group, and I implore you to rethink your position. The warrior savage myth reinforces the racist views that Indians are uncivilized and uneducated, and it has been used to justify policies of forced assimilation and the deconstruction of Indian culture. The use of this word can be deeply painful for people who identify as Native American and sends a bigger message to the community that Olentangy is insensitive at best. I believe this mascot and the associated name was adopted at a time when this type of racism was acceptable, but we are in a more enlightened time now, and I urge you to embrace a full rebranding, one that sheds painful images and language of the past. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Lizette Schreiber, 3041 Alum Trail Place, Lewis Center. Dear Board, I appreciate the district rebranding effort that is already underway. However, I believe changing the offensive Native American imagery associated with Olentangy High School while maintaining the mascot name does not remedy the problem. Native Circle is the longest active Native American education website. They explain the term Braves dehumanizes and equates the Native American male to something less than a man. Comparative example, calling an African American man boy. The use of such mascot names has been condemned by the National Congress of American Indians, American Psychological Association, National Education Association, the NAACP, and more. The National Congress of American Indians called upon the Secretary of the Department of Education to immediately eliminate race-based Native logos, mascots, and names from state educational institutions across the United States. Professional sports teams have already changed the mascots and are in process of changing the names of their teams as well. See Atlanta Braves, Cleveland Indians, and Washington Redskins. We must follow these examples and change Olentangy High School's mascot name as well. Kara Randolph, no address submitted. Dear Olentangy School Board members, I am writing in regard to the rebranding of school mascots and specifically keeping the name Braves. I want to applaud your willingness to remove the offensive imagery and ask that you continue to make the bold move of removing equally offensive language. Many Native American people, including the National Council of American Indians, have made statements specifically about the use of the word Braves, asserting the use of the word perpetuates the warrior savage myth often associated with Native people. This may come as a surprise to people not part of a marginalized group, and I implore you to rethink your position. The warrior savage myth reinforces the racist views that Indians are uncivilized and uneducated, and it has been used to justify policies of forced assimilation and the deconstruction of Indian culture. The use of this word can be deeply painful for people who identify as Native American and sends a bigger message to the community that Olentangy is insensitive at best. I believe this mascot and the associated name was adopted at a time when this type of racism was acceptable, but we are in a more enlightened time now, and I urge you to embrace a full rebranding, one that sheds painful images and language of the past. Thank you for your attention to this matter. George Reed, 6593 Kellogg Drive, Powell. First of all, kudos to everyone to finally making the correct decision to open schools full-time on March 15th. Albeit later than hoped, it's the correct step forward. Now that our children can start getting a full 100% education, we have lots for which to make up, seeing that most at-home schooling days are homework and not a day of learning. That and the fact that schools are closed for less than 1 inch of snow, we only fall farther and farther behind. And why do we close an entire day for a meager amount of snow? It is Central Ohio, it is wintertime, and it snows. Since we have this remote thing down so well, any snow days should become remote days for students, not a free day. I understand the law states we can have 20 plus days of no school per year, but how does that maximize learning for every student? I suggest we first of all cancel spring break. The kids will be back to school for less than a complete 2 weeks. They will be starting to get some momentum, and then they get a week plus a day to lose that momentum all over again. And why do we need a day off before an entire week off? You need to push these kids and push hard this final part of the year. They've had enough breaks and 2 easy days these past 12 months. This is the end of the 3rd week of February, at the time of this writing, February 19th, and my Group B student has been in the classroom for a total of 3 days this month. That's why we need to kill the 4-day weekends, the snow days, for a measly amount of snow, and cancel spring break. We encourage people not to travel, but we give them 6 school days to do that. The Ohio State University canceled their spring break. We need to give it all we have going into the end of the school year and maximize our days available and their learning. Thank you for your time. Kurt Kowaleski, 2857 Prairie Drive, Lewis Center. After reading all the public participation comments from last month's board meeting, it is quite amusing to read multiple identical form responses, all in resounding support for ridding our district of all those racist Indian images and mascots. It almost conveys the sense that there is widespread support in the community for the nonsense undertaken with the rebranding project, when in actuality, we all know it was one of the angry gender studies students or an angry America-hating activist staff member who went around yelling, screaming, and shaming people into signing a pre-written form and submitting it to the board. Of course, with the threat of being called a racist looming over their head if they didn't comply. My God, didn't you know how utterly insensitive and racist it is to use the word Braves or to have pictures of Indians all over the place? Because everyone knows that the most devious and racist way for the dastardly white man to denigrate those hated Indians and to wipe their existence from the collective memory is to name cities, buildings, sport teams, and schools after them, and to make kids wear clothes with Indian images on them. Please. You people need to go back to the universities with your drum circles and gender, race, whiteness studies classes and keep your insane ideologies far, far away from our children in our school district. I have never seen so much time and effort put forth into so many pseudo-intellectual, nonsensical ideas, parentheses, anti-racism indoctrination for teachers, diversity nonsense 24/7, rebranding images, mascots, socio-emotional pseudoscience forced on our kids, obscene questionnaires given to our children, and the list goes on, end quote, or end parentheses, that are not at all relevant to your mandate of imparting knowledge to our children. Your job has never been the socialization of our children, regardless of what John Dewey and all his progressive acolytes believed. That job is for the parents. It's very simple. You teach our children the 3 R's and non-revisionist history, and we do the rest. It really is that simple. The new mascot at my son's school is a puppy dog. Yay. Actually, it's a German Shepherd. Did you know Hitler had a German Shepherd and her name was Blondie? Do you know how offensive that is to so many people around the world whose families suffered during the Holocaust to have to see a picture of a German Shepherd plastered all over school? On a side note, I can't even put into words how traumatized that poor dog felt going through life with the name Blondie, when it was abundantly clear from all the archival footage and documentation that she self-identified as a male cheetah. What do you wokesters call that? Misgendering or something? You see where this is going, right? You can deconstruct anything and everything you want if you look at it long enough. And that is exactly what these progressive activists are currently doing. It has nothing to do with how the Native Americans feel. The issue is never the issue. It has everything to do with destroying everything that holds a society together. Mascots, statues, traditions, holidays, respect for our history, love of country, reverence for the founding fathers and other historical figures, etc., etc. And once everything has been burnt to the ground, literally and figuratively, they can rebuild society in their distorted utopian vision. The Jacobians tried something similar and it didn't work out too well for the French people or the Jacobians. I believe a lot of people got significantly shorter during that period. Well, I've run out of comment space, so I'll submit the remaining comments at next month's board meeting. Thank you for your time, comrades. Kurt Kowaleski continued. With regards to opening the schools up full-time without masks or social distancing, parentheses, masks and social distancing are simply nonsense virtue signaling that don't do a darn thing, but irreparably damage the psyche of our children, end parentheses, that should have been done long ago. If children are at less risk with COVID than they are with the seasonal flu, are we going to close down schools every cold and flu season? If absolute risk mitigation is the new standard, why in the world would we put our children on a school bus, allow them to participate in sports, ride a bike, allow them out of the house, etc., when the risk to them of injury, death is much higher from all those activities than the risk of dying from COVID? People have seriously lost their collective minds over the past year, and I wish people would go back to being free-thinking individuals who know what is best for themselves and their family, instead of mindlessly following the ever-changing and frankly schizophrenic mandates put out by the so-called experts. I know the typical retort for such an assertion is, my God, they will spread it to their older family members and teachers. Do you want to kill everyone, you monster? Just for kicks, please provide one instance anywhere in the world where a child has infected their teacher or brought the virus home from school and infected an older at-risk family member. I will be patiently awaiting your response. Jillian Bickley, 6287 Streamside Drive, Galena, Ohio. As a fifth grader, I've been looking forward to this year since I first came to Johnny Cake Corners in kindergarten. I've really looked forward to being able to use a locker as a fifth grader. It may seem trivial, but I would like to be able to use my locker when we go back to school full time. There will not be enough room in the classroom with all the students and their backpacks and such. I know we can find a way for us to be able to use our locker safely. This is a big deal for those of us in the fifth grade. Thank you for listening.
5 minutes for the session.
Hamza Cordry, 1414 Cary Lake Circle, Columbus. What data, factual statements, backs up the decision to have all students come back on March 15th and shows that students and their parents will be safe? Why are we not waiting until vaccination is available for the public, students and parents? The hybrid model is great and reduces chances of transmission since it is easier to social distance 15 children versus a full classroom of 25 to 30 students. I just do not understand what we are accomplishing by going back for 4 weeks, excluding the spring break. Also, can you elaborate what percentage of teachers will be vaccinated by March 15th for elementary, middle, and high school? I believe we are increasing the chances of transmission by not letting children and parents be vaccinated in time. Tanya Copley, 5873 Harold Glen Court, Galena. As we move towards the end of the year, I am anxiously awaiting the decision on graduation ceremonies. While I understand the circumstances that led to a drive-through ceremony last year, I think a drive-through graduation is tasteless and devalues the class of 2021's accomplishments. This class has suffered far more consequences due to the pandemic, and by hosting a drive-through, it would only add to an already poor experience. I find the support of a drive-through graduation selfish and abhorrent. I would expect a parent and student survey to be sent prior to any plans being solidified. It is my hope that the district will choose to have graduation in person, even if it requires the class to be split into groups. That's all.
We move on to our discussion items. And the first item, and the only item, is the discussion of the debt issuance. Mrs. Hatfield?
Just one comment on public participation. Fifth graders aren't going to be allowed to use their lockers.
Okay. If you didn't hear that, fifth graders will be allowed to use their lockers. Okay, great.
Miss Binkley, want to make sure Miss Binkley gets her. Bickley.
Mr. Bickley's daughter?
Oh.
Okay. She wrote a very nice letter. Okay, Mrs. Hatfield.
Good evening again. I wanted to bring forward and have a discussion with you regarding the next segment of our debt issuance. As a reminder, I'll start by just kind of giving a general overview of where we are and what is next in that segment to fund, excuse me. So in June of 2020, we sold $42 million of the voted authority from the levy passage. That voted authority gave us $134.7 million that we could issue. The $42 million that have been sold are to fund Shale Meadows construction, to help provide security vestibules and the remaining buildings which do not have them, playground updates, mechanical updates, bus center and lane improvements, Hyatt's Middle School field parking, redesigning that and having that up to date, and the purchase of our administrative office. So the next wave of bonds that we are preparing to sell would fund elementary 17 construction, middle school 6 construction, provide us funding for additional buses, and then the additional building improvements that we were discussed as a part of the bond package when we voted that. So we want to talk about elementary 17 as the prime issue for discussion, and whether or not we need to continue on the same schedule that we had originally planned when the package was brought forward and voted on. Our actual enrollment for pre-K through first grade is lower than projected by about 379 students. And the actual numbers used were as of September 4th of 2020. And the snapshot of the projected versus actual enrollment, you may remember, is a part of the facilities committee presentation that they brought forward to the board and that the board approved in October of 2020. So not new information necessarily, but really information that we've been digesting and tracking and making sure that we can speak to where we are and where we're going with this and our facility needs. Again, this is another slide from the facilities presentation showing what our elementary room capacity is going to be by bringing elementary 16 or Shale Meadows online, and where it will go once we bring elementary 17 online. And as you can see, when we look at 23-24, that's the school year we were anticipating opening elementary 17, and there isn't a dire need for us to do that. There is excess capacity in that area for us at this time. We also know that our, with kindergarten enrollment and preschool enrollment being lower, that we have an opportunity to take a look at the debt issuance and look at the pieces that are related to that and how it impacts us fiscally. So these are some of the points that we've been researching and taking a look at. How do we make a decision on what delaying elementary 17 could do for us? So it impacts two different areas of our financials. The 5-year forecast, which is general fund operating dollars, as well as our debt capacity and what we sell when we go to market to sell the bonds and issue the bond debt. So as you can see from the slide, we have approximately $1.7 million of operating costs currently in the forecast in fiscal year 2024. That would push that out to fiscal year 2025. So it doesn't go completely out of our 5-year window that we're looking at in terms of long-term planning, but it does avoid 1 year of compounding expenditures in our general operating funds. It could also reduce the amount of debt in the upcoming sale by about $27 million. That's a net present value savings of approximately $577,000 and could save us almost $1 million of interest costs over the 30-year life of the bonds. There are some risks to this. It may increase our construction costs, approximately 1.2. By bidding the elementary 17 with middle school 6, we can gain economies of scale in some of the materials and labor that are available. And so we're estimating that cost to be about 1.2 million. And then there's also interest rate fluctuation risk. What we know about the market today is that interest rates have been low and are at historical lows still. They began to drop at the beginning of the pandemic and have held. Some analysis is assuming that we have an 18-month recession area for those interest rate costs, that they'll stay low that long. So we've done some research with our, working with our municipal bond advisors, or municipal advisors, excuse me, Baker and Tilly, and talking about what are the forecasts, what's going on in the community, what does the market look like for an entity like Olentangy Schools that has a AAA rating from S&P and selling this dollar amount of debt. And so looking at that, they've pulled some information from Bloomberg as of February 18th. And I want to make sure that I read the disclaimer at the bottom, that the data reflects a snapshot in time. It's not a guaranteed or fixed rate information. But what we can see in terms of the predictions is that the interest rates will probably stay low, stay around that 2%, and not trend up toward a 2.5 until further out in Q2 of 2023. By delaying the issuance, we're looking at issuing the elementary 17 debt probably Q2 of 2022, and for a 30-year debt, that's looking at about 2.25%, according to current forecasts. We know that if we have a 50 basis points or 0.5% variance in the interest rate models that we're using, it could cause us more in, of course, interest rate costs over the life of the bonds. But the risk is, do you take it now or do you take it later? Do you wait for the market to change and come on board more quickly? We also have the opportunity to say, if we think that interest rates are going to rise faster than this current prediction or forecast, it's another 6 months that we could go to market versus waiting another year if we start to see those rise back into the 3 to 4 to 5% range, but it doesn't appear to be doing so. So we wanted to give you this information, answer any questions you might have about this planning before we bring a resolution to sell the next issuance of debt in March to be passed by the board so we can begin bidding the construction for our middle school 6.
Questions? Mr. O'Brien?
Emily and I had a chance to talk about this
Okay.
earlier in the week. I mean, it's a kind of an interesting time in the interest rates. I mean, this was about a week ago, and the 10 years, is at 150 today. So there's a little volatility right now in rates until people kind of figure out what Biden's going to do. I mean, Jerome Powell had some favorable comments this week about kind of lower for longer, and I guess being wary of inflation, but not too concerned about inflation. So I think, the historical pattern of this board is, we don't raise the money till we need it. And so if we delay a year, you are taking some interest rate risk, as Emily pointed out, some cost risk. So, I think we've kind of worked with the facilities committee and see what the recommendation comes out at.
The facilities committee does it give them heartburn to wait a year to build that next elementary school?
No, I don't think so. I think they'd be very much in line with what you're saying. It'd be interesting to see what the Finance and Audit Committee might suggest.
Sure. And I know there is an upcoming meeting on March 3rd that we can bring this forward and just kind of reiterate those points and talk about that savings in construction costs for using economics of scale to build them together and see if that's changed. I know when those proposals were originally put together and costed out, we were in a much, much different market. Labor was hard to find, materials was hard to get to, were hard to bring in, and that's different dynamic. We're seeing delay in materials being shipped. I'm sure you've seen it just in general as a consumer at the grocery store. Sometimes there's milk, sometimes there's only fat-free milk, sometimes there's only 2% milk. So, those same types of philosophies and conditions apply, but the labor market is really open right now. So people are looking for work to do, and that's not creating an issue with the construction we're currently going through. So we can certainly pose that question.
Material costs are expected to really increase, at least for
Lumber's been a mess.
Right,
Lumber's up to
yeah.
30%.
It's been a number of years, but in fact, I was on the facilities committee at the time, what was formerly called the development committee. And we did bring forward to the board at that time a particular year for a particular building, and it was pushed back a year, and there was no negative consequences of doing that.
Right,
So it turned out to be a good decision
right.
to wait.
You know,
I
and-
hate to,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I hate to, build a building and open it half full.
Right.
And that's what the projection numbers are showing, that, we might be able to have space in the buildings that we'll have, knowing that 16 will be coming on.
I think the other item that, just to remind folks too, is we did build in some contingency into the cost of the buildings itself. So while there is an estimated 1.2 additional cost or expense that we might not have gained through those economics of scale, we do have contingency built in that could cover that. So it wouldn't be that we would have not enough voted authority to cover the construction cost. It would just be a matter of looking at, is it an interest rate cost you want to take, or do we want to stay with our philosophy of not opening till we need it and not selling the debt till we need it, which has proven to be very prudent over the years to do that because market conditions change frequently.
Any other questions or concerns? We're not voting on this tonight, it's just for information.
So it sounds like facilities and finance and audit are meeting on the same day. Aren't we the 3rd? Next week?
I don't think they're the same day, but I can.
Finance and Audit Committee isn't meeting until April.
Really?
I think next Wednesday.
Yeah, next Wednesday, the 3rd.
Oh, facilities, yes.
Facilities, right? And
Right.
you said April? Oh, I misheard that one. Okay.
So facilities and finance and audit are not meeting at the same time.
So when would we be bringing this forward?
The resolution to sell the bonds would be coming either at the March 11th or the second March meeting. So we've got some time to discuss that with the facilities committee.
Before finance and audit.
Before we have to bring it forward as a resolution for approval. I know, it's really confusing. I say the wrong names to them all the time. I apologize. I may have done that in our discussion.
Correctly. Thank you.
Of course.
Okay.
Anything else?
Very good.
All right, that's
Good
it.
research.
Thank you.
All right, I'll let you get back to your seat before you present the treasure action items.
So I would like to present treasurer action items A through D for approval, please.
Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
A second.
Any further,
Mrs. Patrick?
Mrs. Patrick and
Okay.
I was the first, Dave was the
Gotcha.
second.
any further discussion on those? Okay, can you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Weiss?
Yes.
And Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel?
Yes.
Thank you.
Superintendent action items, what do you have to present to us tonight, Mr. Ray?
I'd like to present superintendent action items A through F for approval.
Do I have a motion?
I'll motion.
So moved.
Do you second? She motioned.
Oh, I didn't hear it. Sorry. Second.
Okay. Any further discussion on those items? Okay, call the roll, please.
Dr. Weiss?
Yes.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
And Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel?
Yes.
Thank you.
And now I need a motion and a second to enter into executive session as permitted by section 121.22G4 of the Ohio Revised Code for the purpose of preparing for, conducting, or reviewing options or bargaining sessions with public employees as permitted by section 121.22G1 of the Ohio Revised Code to consider the employment and compensation of public employees. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Oh, Dave's got the second.
Mr. O'Brien?
Yes.
Mr. King?
Yes.
Mrs. Patrick?
Yes.
Dr. Weiss?
Yes.
And Mrs. Wagner-Fiesel?
Yes.
Thank you.
We will not have any further action except to adjourn after our executive session. Thank you.